endless long reads.
Imagine you could never die and have lived for millennia, watching everything you die and having to rebuild year after year. Life stops having much meaning. Such is the plight of B, the Berserker, who is conceived as a weapon and cursed to live forever. The Berserker series was created by Keanu Reeves and published by Boom Studios. Today, we will be diving into the spin-off of the main storyline, which talks about one of the chronicles of B, or as he was known in ancient Greek times, Anute. The immortal warrior comes to blows with a god from the world of H.P. Lovecraft in this epic crossover of mythologies. We open on the kingdom of Atlantis, the beautiful, legendary kingdom situated on the side of a beach. The kingdom's beauty, culture, and wealth were the envy of everyone across the seven seas. Every barbarian, brigand, ruffian, slaver, and any other type of conquering entity that I may have accidentally missed out on from the rest of the world, got drawn to the stories of the untold riches of Atlantis. They all journeyed thousands of miles to plunder the bounties of gold just ripe for their taking. As we see the gates of Poseidon easily breached by an expansive army, a homogeneous mixture of all the scoundrels and scourge of the world, armed to the teeth with elephants, horses, even bareback, we come to find that the stories of Atlantis' great fortunes are actually a form of honey trap. The stories are meant to attract the greedy marauders so that they may perform the ultimate sacrifice and spill their blood for the benefit of the kingdom. These unfortunate souls are slain to satiate the bloodlust of Atlantis' real treasure, not the gold and spires, but the demigod that protects them. A demonstration is playing out before our very eyes. The hordes of scum attacking the kingdom are ordered to halt by the powerful voice of a lone figure standing at the base of the kingdom steps. The approaching mob rumbles to a comical halt. One of the horseback generals comments that the kingdom has sent a pretty-looking emissary to negotiate their surrender and asks the women for her terms. The woman identifies herself as Zubutai, the loyal servant to King Asius the Kind, monarch of Atlantis. She wears a purple robe adorned with golden borders and the crest of Atlantis. Zubutai has a white cape flowing in the wind, and her hair is tied in ponytails under a golden helm. The woman adds that she is the chronicler and squire to the king's personal guard. Zubutai declares that the soldiers are trespassing on Atlantean territory, instructing them to surrender and pay tribute to the king in the hopes of avoiding the Atlantean wrath. The entire army bursts out laughing. The general mockingly asks her what would happen if they refused her offer. The pouty woman replies that they will face the king's personal guard. The man spreads his arms in amusement and asks where the king's guard is. Zubutai turns around and points her ringed hand above at the figure standing above her. She goes into full Paul Heyman mode and introduces the men to the pet demon of Poseidon himself, the tip of the celestial trident, the slayer of hope itself, Anute, the Berserker. Anute is dressed in a red armor that bears an uncanny resemblance to the armor of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Must be a happy coincidence. He has his back turned to them and is chugging down a bottle of what I want to say is water, but given the other bottles messily littered around him, I'd say it's probably alcohol. The general is confused for a moment, but then tells Zubutai to quit yapping and go get her king. He is about to talk about terms of Asius' surrender when suddenly his entire head and torso are obliterated. I guess that's a no on surrender. As Anute dances and slices through the entire army like a ballerina of butchering, chopping limbs and stomping heads, Zubutai describes him as the greatest legend that was never told, mostly because nobody ever went against him and lived to tell the tale. She says that for over 50 years her family had pledged their loyalty to the immortal Berserker. She, like her father before her, tends to Anute's every need and makes an account of his legendary deeds. Anute is described as a lesson in why gods must be feared. As Zubutai is describing the day that her father prepared her to take his place as Anute's aide, the Berserker is busy chopping through ruffians like a chef cutting onions. Zubutai recalls that her father had disclosed the one true need of their master, which must be fulfilled no matter what, and that is his insatiable lust for carnage. Anute rips hearts out and continues painting the ground red with blood, as Zubutai explains that he has an inferno of brutality that could destroy the entire world if left unbridled. Suddenly, the Berserker is hit from behind. It's a giant cannonball. The barbarians ready up another fiery ball of artillery towards Anute. The Berserker, in true Keanu Reeves fashion, mutters, ducking duckers. Yes, I know what I just said makes no sense, but you know how YouTube is with profanity filters. And slices the speeding cannonball into 1,000 pieces. The scattered shards impale and decimate the soldiers around Anute as the red rage machine wreaks havoc on the entire swarm of enemies, the red armor hiding the amount of blood gushing out of the immortal warrior's own body. So, he's like Deadpool. Zubutai admits that it is her honor to witness Anute's brutality. She explains that despite her master's murderous tendencies, while he's tearing off someone's face no less, he's actually a generous being, bringing her dates and wine for her birthday. By this time, the hordes of soldiers are finally starting to deal some damage to Anute. He gets impaled by a wave of spears, his pants are ripped apart at his bowels, and he loses half his face in one place and parts of his armor armor in another. Nevertheless, he continues bashing the pulp out of the soldiers, either with his bare hands or his indestructible sword. Zubutai reveals that, while a nice person, Anute refuses to sleep with her despite her advances, all the while eating an ancient hoagie and viewing the carnage through some opera binoculars like an ancient New Yorker who got tickets to Broadway. Eventually, the trumpeters blow their horns to signal the end of the battle, as a large crowd gathers to applaud their guardian's gory showing. To many of them, this is the most spectacular thing they have ever witnessed. By this time, Anute's armor is in pieces, his entrails spilling out of his kneeling self, and a litany of swords, pikes, and arrows are protruding out of his bloody body. All around him, vultures are feasting on the remains of the entire army he has just slaughtered. Zubutai rides in on a chariot and a bottle of alcohol. Guess drinking and driving was allowed back then. She tells her master to hurry before he heals completely, as the impatient citizens want to witness the gore. For them, Anute grunts in agreement as the two ride back into the kingdom of Atlantis, where the citizens revere the Berserker on a level equal to Poseidon himself. They are showered with praise and flowers as they ride through the town. Despite being a humble person who kept to himself, Anute only engages with the public during his victory days, where the demigod feels the love of the Atlantean people and reciprocates it. Anute stands on the chariot, rapidly healing before the adulating crowd, and closes his eyes as the flowers shower from above. In the court of King Asius the Kind, Anute dresses in a black outfit with golden embroidery. Zubutai narrates that it was no secret that the Berserker was the only reason Asius's reign had survived for as long as it had, but the people didn't care as long as their safety was assured. The king asks his guardian where he has been hiding away, adding that he misses Anute's presence in the court. The Berserker replies that he too misses Asius's presence in the reliquary, where he spends most of his days reading the ancient scrolls. He offers to begin the king's studies again, but Asius dismisses it, annoyed with Anute's endless scrolling. If he only knew how the roles would be reversed in modern days, and parents would be sick of their children scrolling. Asius tells Anute that life is more than just obsessing over the past, and that they should be looking to the future. The king tells Anute that there is something he wants to share with the Berserker, but stops himself, deciding to tell it later. Zubutai reveals that her master loved the king as his own, and that it was this love which made it difficult for Anute to see the change in Asius's eyes. The kindness in his green eyes was corrupted with the wide, unending desire of the forbidden. Anute still looked at the king and saw the eyes of the orphaned, innocent boy whom he rescued from a grim future decades ago. A flashback shows that Asius's parents, the king and queen of Atlantis, were murdered in a coup d'etat, and Asius was about to suffer the same fate when Anute had intervened. He saw his own story repeating with the little boy and decided to save him. Anute went a step further and decided to stay and protect Asius from being used as a tool for evil, greedy men. Being immortal, Anute's time protecting Atlantis was little more than a small vacation in an otherwise timeless journey, and Atlantis was like his first true home, one that was both chosen and built by him. Asius calls over his priest, Vizane, a man dressed in black and red robes. Clear and obvious bad guy alert. Vizane thanks Anute for his service, and the Berserker launches a thinly veiled threat towards the priest, stating that it is his duty to remove all threats to the crown with extreme prejudice. Vizane appears to relent, apologizing to Anute and bowing before him. A twisted grin spreads across the priest's face. Zubutai expresses sorrow in the fact that her master could save the king from all outer threats, but could not save Asius from himself. Anute watches on as Asius mingles with Vizane and his cult, a wave of anger welling up inside him. He wasn't the king's father, but did not approve of the new company Asius was keeping. Since the Asius's religious beliefs are no business of the king's guard, Anute's hands are tied. That night, Zubutai finds Anute in the reliquary. She is drunk on wine and invites Anute over for the orgy upstairs, telling him that there is a queue lining up for him. Anute flatly rejects the invitation. The Berserker reminds his aide that he does not go to such events, adding that he had already told her to stop asking him to come as well. In this world, some men die of thirst while others reject the sea before them, I guess. Zubutai looks around to find that the reliquary has been completely ransacked. Anute explains that it was the priest Vizane and his followers who were the culprits behind the burglary. He notes that they have taken the obelisk, an ancient rock, and some dangerous scrolls that Anute had hidden away. The Berserker reveals that these scrolls were written in an evil language known as Aklo, a tongue that corrupts the mortal mind. Anute figures that Vizane and his apostles will undoubtedly be planning to use the relics to resurrect gods that have long passed. Flabbergasted, the drunk Zubutai accidentally spits out her wine onto a scroll, promising to reimburse Anute for the damage. Drunk secretaries, am I right? She suggests getting some soldiers together and rounding up the priest and his followers. Anute sniffs the air like a wolf and tells her that the thieves have not left the palace. He tells her to follow him, tracking the scent of Vizane to the highest tower of the kingdom. At the northeastern tower, Anute finds Vizane and the apostles lined up behind King Asius in the garden of the tower, the obelisk placed on a raised platform. Asius tries to calm Anute down and requests suggests that he not be mad. Maybe not the smartest move, as the Berserker demands answers for the betrayal. The king tells Anute that he and the apostles merely want to have a chat, revealing that they are on the cusp of a brand new world order, and that they are all chosen to bring about a great change. Both Asius and Vizane's eyes gleam with greed as the king commands Anute to stand down and listen to the priest. Anute is having none of it, growling that the evil priest had poisoned Asius's mind. He asserts that he will not allow Vizane and his followers to achieve their goal of world destruction, and vows to stop it at all costs. Anute begins to walk towards the king, despite the stammering Asius's commands to halt. The Berserker apologizes to his king, adding that he doesn't mind being banished for his insolence, but asserts that he must kill all the men behind Asius for his own good. While he is walking, Anute steps on a trigger stone that springs a trap. Suddenly, green vines break out of the ground and surround the immortal warrior. The vines have sharp thorns that impale Anute, immobilizing him and knocking his sword away. The Berserker lets out a loud scream of pain. Meanwhile, the king's soldiers restrain Zubutai, keeping her from helping her master. The corrupted King Asius apologizes to Anute for resorting to such crude methods, commenting that the trap seemed way more painful than he had been led to believe. Anute seems broken and asks for forgiveness from Asius for failing his ward. The king tries to reason that once Anute's purpose is realized, both of them can be immortal brothers together. Vizane steps up and orders the soldiers to fill cups with Anute's blood and fetch the warrior's sword. A sharp pipe is stuck into Anute's chest and his blood trickles down into the cups. The priest comments that the mighty sword, given to Anute by the king years ago, is actually an artifact forged from a primordial ore. He reveals that there is a hidden purpose of the legendary sword. It is part of a set that unlocks untold power. He admires the sword, explaining that it is a key that opens the gateway locked by the obelisk, the gateway to God himself. He mocks Anute for never bothering to use the sword to its full potential. Vizane instructs his loyalists to drink the blood of the immortal warrior as a way of marking themselves as the faithful when the wrath of God passes over them. The apostles all chug down the cups of blood, which I can't say would have been very tasty, as Anute begins to scream and rage. Vizane proudly declares that the cage is unbreakable and that his men had spent years planning out the best way to utilize his immortal gifts. He thanks Anute for bringing them there to fulfill the prophecy when the warrior lets the Berserker rage engulf him. Anute begins to crack the vines that hold him, bellowing that he will feed the so-called wizards his own guts. Yummy! The immortal warrior breaks his hands free of the vines and begins to tear out more of the bonds. Vizane, now visibly scared, hastily begins the ritual. Before Anute can break out of the cage, the priest plunges the sword into the obelisk, releasing red lightning around them. Everyone looks up at the sky, where a column of blood-red light ignites the edge of the moon, turning it black. The portal to hell opens up, and a stench of rot and decay fills the air. As Anute finally breaks out of his cage, a loud, ancient screech is let out from the portal. A gargantuan monster appears through the portal. The godlike being appears to be a weird, humanoid octopus with 1,000 spiked tendrils and dozens of eyes. Vizane and his apostles look to the sky and chant his name, Cthulhu. Now, for those who are uninformed, Cthulhu is a cosmic character that was first written by horror fiction writer H.P. Lovecraft. The entity is an ancient cosmic being who is an octopus dragon humanoid with an occult following. His first appearance was in the short story of a pulp magazine back in 1928. A neat cameo in this comic, don't you think? Cthulhu descends upon Atlantis and starts destroying the kingdom, bringing its massive tendrils down on the towers. Vizane points out to everyone around that the great beast is not destroying the tower they stand on because he can see those who are faithful to him. The mad priest pulls out a scroll and begins the incantation of welcoming the cosmic monster above them. Zubutai uses this moment to knock out the soldier restraining her and tells the freed Anute that they have to get out of there. Much to her surprise, the Berserker pulls his sword out of the obelisk, shattering the rock into pieces. When his aide asks him what he is doing, Anute replies that he has to fulfill his duty, adding that the monster is trespassing on Atlantean territory and that he is the protector of the kingdom. Asius tries to stop the immortal warrior, but with a powerful jump, Anute launches himself at the monster, shouting loudly that it is time to die. Words I'm sure a 1,000-foot-tall squid cannot hear from that distance. Cthulhu is taken by surprise as Anute arrives all the way close to the monster's face and stabs him in one of his many eyes with his sword. The attack leaves the being screaming in pain as Anute begins to slide downwards with the sword. I can't even begin to imagine how painful that would be. I can't stand dust going in my eye, let alone an ancient broadsword. Cthulhu reels backwards in pain, crashing into a whole host of buildings. Anute Anute mocks the being, asking if the stab hurt. Excellent rage bait, I'll say. Suddenly, a tentacle grabs hold of the Berserker and restrains him. The immortal warrior says that the squid has arrived only to die, as Cthulhu, clearly outraged at being misidentified as a squid, lifts Anute up to his many eyes. The giant monster speaks to Anute in its ancient tongue, commenting that he can smell the elder gods on the Berserker and announces that he will kill the light, calling Anute a half-breed. Unimpressed, the protector of Atlantis begins slashing at the tentacle of Cthulhu and tears the tentacle off to free himself. Annoyed, the mighty behemoth launches Anute in the air like a slingshot, taunting him that the warrior is nothing compared to the god. He slams Anute down, sending the Berserker crashing through buildings and landing in a tower, right in the middle of an orgy. Guess he went there after all. Around him, the citizens of Atlantis look in pure horror as their savior tries to get up, only to realize that his body had been split in half from the crash. Anute's intestines are sprawled everywhere, including around someone's neck like a disgusting flare. Suddenly, the tentacles of Cthulhu break through the roof and begin to pull the Atlanteans out, as the citizens scream and fall out of the tower. Anute desperately tries to force his body to regenerate quicker. The tentacles knock the tower to one side as Anute hangs onto his sword, a tiny portion of his lower body finally connecting to his torso. With a shriek of pain, the Berserker launches himself out of the tower and begins to slice through Cthulhu's tentacles again. The monster cries out in pain, demanding that Anute stop. The immortal warrior simply responds by hacking and slicing through every bit of tentacle that he can see. Cthulhu whines that Anute has had his time in the world, and now it's the behemoth's era. Anute rejects the idea and hops from tentacle to tentacle. He zigzags his way up to Cthulhu's face and declares that the god's time is up, chucking his sword like a frisbee at the behemoth's tooth. The sword is lodged into one of Cthulhu's 100 teeth, and the monster lets out a scream of pain. The impact of Anute's sword is so violent that the entire tooth begins to crack up. The Berserker lands on the sword and plunges it deeper, telling the screaming octopus, see, he knows the difference, that he is right to feel fear. Lightning begins to swirl around Anute as he pulls the sword out, declaring that he can actually hurt Cthulhu. As he says this, the lightning separates the monster's tooth, leaving the great behemoth howling in agony. The angered Cthulhu starts that Anute will die with the rest of the world, as his broken tooth falls on the tower where Visane and his apostles stand. At the tower, Zubutai is warding off the approaching soldiers when the tooth crashes in behind her. Visane tries to calm her down by claiming that everyone on the tower is perfectly safe, a notion that Zubutai ridicules. Suddenly, Anute too crashes into the tower. Zubutai asks her master how it's going. Woman, how do you think it's going? Anute looks at her with gritted teeth and begins to respond when the tentacles of Cthulhu come crashing down on the tower. The giant monster decides that he has had quite enough of the immortal warrior and proceeds to swallow the entire column, with everyone on it getting sucked into the monster's beaked mouth. They fall down Cthulhu's neck, screaming, all except for Anute, of course. No, the Berserker declares that Cthulhu has invited death into his own gullet. A flashback shows a young Asius when he had to take the mantle of king, and how overwhelmed he got at all the big decisions he had to make. Anute had stepped in and ordered that the young king be left alone. As the ministers and wise men scattered, the Berserker had assured Asius that he was the safest person on earth. The little boy had made Anute swear it as well. Cut to the present. Inside Cthulhu's stomach, the Berserker looks disappointedly at the dead body of King Asius. He tells the dead king to go to his parents, who await him at the end of his path. Over his shoulder, Anute hears Visane checking up on his apostles, still insisting on reading out his damned incantation spell. Geez, some guys just don't know when to give up. The priest and his followers turn around to come face to face with the raging Anute, and realize that their goose is well and truly cooked. The Berserker asks Visane if he remembers what he had been told. The priest desperately begs for his life and tries to pacify Anute, claiming that he can help the warrior as he speaks Cthulhu's language. To Visane's shock, Anute growls back in an ancient tongue. He speaks Aklo. Well, bet if you had no internet, no real vices, and lived for tens of thousands of years, I'm sure you could learn a language or two. The stunned priest tries to nitpick and ask Anute if he knows the proper grammatical gender of the language. Nothing worse than an evil grammar Nazi. Anute, just to prove a point, replies in perfect Aklo, accent included, which Visane finds quite remarkable. Anute thanks the evil priest and plunges his hand through Visane's torso. The evil sorcerer can do little except squeal in disgust as the immortal Berserker pulls out his intestines. It's feeding time. Anute force feeds Visane's cowardly guts into the priest's mouth, keeping his grisly promise. It seems he is a man of focus, commitment, and sheer freaking will when it comes to violent murders. Zubutai warns her master that Cthulhu's stomach has begun to churn out acid, pointing to the rest of Visane's apostles who are slowly getting melted into slop. Anute asks his aide to remain calm as he listens intently, detecting a faint pumping noise coming from their side. Zubutai explains that her master's senses are sharper than any man or beast, as Anute makes a giant incision in the wall of the great monster's stomach and drags them both inside before the acid pit gets to them. The primordial being that is Cthulhu Cthulhu suddenly realizes what is happening inside of him and lets out humongous shrieks. Inside, Anute is busy running around the heart of the monster, slicing and dicing the giant pumping organ. If Cthulhu were all octopus, he'd probably be better off, considering the fact that octopuses have 3 hearts. The creature's purplish blood pours out from every corner of his heart as Anute bellows that Cthulhu should have just stayed in hell. All the while, Zubutai watches the gory scenes from a vantage point above the monster's bleeding heart. Cthulhu lets out a piercing scream as he falls backwards, which is, unfortunately, where the kingdom of Atlantis is. Zubutai recounts her master's definition of God meant more power than sense. She notes that, despite being a supposed god of infinite destruction, Cthulhu was just like any other animal, an animal who would die if her master ripped its heart out, as he has done with many other monsters on different occasions. With an enormous crash, Cthulhu flattens the entire city of Atlantis, his spiked tentacles bringing down every standing tower and building in reach. Soon, a gash is created on the creature's skin with the help of a sword. Purple blood oozes out as Anute flies out of the puncture, Zubutai clutching onto her master for dear life. They both land on the floor as a downpour of blood rains down upon them. Zubutai narrates that Anute had successfully managed to save the world from turning into a doomed hellscape, but in the process, the fates had only rewarded him by letting him watch his city, his home, dissolve in the fires that sprang from the dead Cthulhu's own body. Seriously, no good deed ever goes unpunished, eh? The kingdom of Atlantis slowly begins to sink under the water, taking the wretched remains of Cthulhu to the bottom of the ocean. Both Zubutai and Anute watch on as every trace of the glorious civilization is wiped away by the tides. Zubutai recalls that the immortal Berserker just watched on without any emotion. They stood until the last spire and the last tentacle were swept away into the ocean, and all that remained were the gentle waves. After that, she recalls that her master had thanked her for her service and then released her from employment, choosing to go live in self-imposed exile in the wilderness. She said that the wound of losing Atlantis would never heal, even for an immortal being such as Anute the Berserker. She says that he couldn't bring himself to cry despite all the pain and suffering he endured, basically calling her ex-boss an emotionally constipated man, and declared that she would weep for both of them. And that is the tragic end to today's story. What were your thoughts about it? Did you feel like it could have done with a little more or a little less gore? What are your thoughts on Keanu Reeves incorporating Lovecraftian characters like Cthulhu with Greek mythology like Atlantis? Do you wish to see the other spin-off stories that have been released by Boom Studios under the Berserker banner? Comment it all down below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. Have a marvelous day ahead.